This is the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with your host, Vicki Davis.
Today's sponsor is Dell, where Black Friday starts now. Dell has deals for listeners of this show and readers of the Cool Cat Teacher blog going live right now through November 27th of 2022. They have everything from computers, gaming laptops, or even a slick wireless mouse. So stay tuned at the end of the show to get that link and get your deals on some awesome Dell computers. So today we're talking with my friend George Couros. George is a friend of mine from some time ago. We won't say how long, right, George? He's author of The Innovator's Mindset, Innovate Inside the Box, and he has a newer book that's inspiring called Because of a Teacher. And so, George, you want to tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book?
Do you remember in 2020, it was like March of 2020, obviously the world shuts down, like at least on North American side, right? That shut down earlier in some other places. But there is that like 2-3 week period where everybody loved teachers. Like it was like 2-3 weeks. And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my God, like this is the awakening that people are going to really start appreciating teachers because, a lot of people had to, teach their kids at home and they saw how hard it was with one kid. And they're like, oh my God, this is like impossible. Now I'm doing it. And imagine someone, 2025. And then, the 2 weeks was up and then it was kind of, everyone was grumpy again. So I don't know if you remember that part. I'm sure you remember that part. And one of the things I started doing, I think it was in 2021, I wanted to just try something new. I always take these little sabbaticals just to kind of think of some new ideas. So I actually started this series it was just called 3 Questions. And I would ask people, who's a teacher that inspired you? Who's an administrator that inspired you? And what advice would you give to your first year teacher self? And so I always like to model this stuff. So I went first and answer these questions. And I couldn't even stick to my own script because I couldn't name a teacher because I had so many great ones. So I actually talked about my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Stock, my grade 3 teacher, who's also my music teacher, Mrs. Penrose, and my high school phys ed teacher, who's also my football coach, Calvin Hobbs. And I talked about their impact on me. And literally within, like, I think it was 24 to 48 hours, every one of them found it somehow. Like somebody knew them, connected, and said, hey, do you know this guy's talking about you? And they all messaged me. Some of them commented on the video. Some of them messaged me through DM. And it's like, I was just kind of thinking like, this is really amazing. And how these people don't know the impact they had on me and how many people don't hear that impact. And so the podcast kind of started there, where I'd ask people these 3 questions. And then just kind of one day I was like, this would actually be a really great book. So I contacted some people. It was a Saturday night. I remember it very distinct a manner. And I said, what do you think about this idea? So I have basically 15 people who answer, the first question, the first question. There's 5 of them answer who's a teacher inspired you. The first, the other 5 answer who's an admin inspired you. And then we have another 5 answer who's what advice would you give to your first year teacher self. And it's kind of like this ode to teachers, like just talking about the teachers from our past and really how much of a impact they've had, but there's some really powerful learning there because you see a consistent theme in the stories, right? Nobody's talking about, oh yeah, like I remember in grade 2, that science test, like that changed my life, right? Like that, nobody's talking about that. So there's some really powerful, learning for, educators today. But it was really it's one of those books that you can learn from, but you can also sit and read at the beach and, just kind of wherever you're at and, short stories and just really incredible authors. And it was interesting because Saturday I had thought of the idea. By Sunday, I'd confirmed 15 authors, which tells you, just people wanted to share those stories. And yeah, they're just really inspiring people sharing throughout the stories and just kind of cool to actually see.
So as you look at the stories, is there any that just jumps out at you like, wow, I wish that teacher had known this is what they meant?
Yeah, like there's one Steve Bowler. He goes by Stan Tall Steve on Instagram. He's wonderful, wonderful man. He talked about basically his art teacher, and he is actually a trained art teacher who became an administrator, which is not typically, you don't hear that too often. And he talked about this art teacher who basically just advocated for him the entire time, and just kind of thinking about basically it wasn't even just during school; it was actually after the fact that this teacher is still cheering them on and connecting and seeing that. And like when you read Steve's story, what I really loved about it is that you kind of realize how when educators have students in their classrooms, they're kind of always their students. Like they're always kind of cheering for them. And you see, and I know you've seen this too, right? There's some negativity on social media. And I always think about that it's kind of weird sometimes when I see educators being negative towards other educators, because they should remember that, a lot of the times I hear people like, oh, this person, they're complaining about them. I'm like, some teachers actually cheering that kid on right now, right? Even though they're like 58 years old, they're still cheering them on, wishing for the best for them. And it was just really powerful to see that.
There've been so many teachers who've been quitting, and one thing that's frustrated me about social media is it seems that the algorithms favor the negative and not the positive. So there's teachers I've talked to that are like, why does this matter? I am working so hard and I go to quote relax. You don't go to relax on Twitter anymore or Instagram like we used to, but used to that's how we chilled. But I go there to quote relax and I see all this negativity like we're talking about. What's your message to teachers about why they matter?
I really try to focus on finding people that uplift. And it's not that I think a lot of times people get mixed up with the notion of negativity and people challenging, like really challenging to elevate to help you get better. And there's two different things. And I'm all for it. And I know this might sound kind of weird, but if you're a teacher and you hate teaching, I honestly think that, if you're not in a good place, I think it is, I don't think it's the worst thing to actually leave the profession. And I know that's maybe kind of a weird thing to say, but I know that sometimes the best things I've ever done in my education career is not getting a new job. It's actually leaving an old one and saying, like, this is not good for me. This is not good for who I am. And, I was blessed to leave one job and then go to another where I was about to quit education. And actually, I said, I'll give it one more year. Had the best leader ever. She totally changed my perspective. And she didn't just change my perspective, she also helped me see things in myself that I didn't see. And that, you realize how great that is too, right? So I think if you're struggling, that's fine. And if you want to leave, that's fine. But also you don't necessarily need the affirmation and make sure that other people dislike the job too. And I think, there's a lot of people that, we're actually struggling. And it was kind of funny because you say this. I saw a few teachers saying like, I hate saying this, but like I had one of the best years of my career last year, and they almost felt bad to share that. And I think for me, one of the things I realized, especially in the last part of the book, is that you have these really accomplished educators talking about the first year teaching. Like now, these people are superintendents, they're consultants that work with education systems all over the world, and they talked about how they really struggled when they first started teaching. But it was like really fascinating because what you start to realize is that even in your worst year, right? Even in some of the worst years, you have such a tremendous impact that, kids remember you. Like I think, and you're probably the same way as me, like the things that we know now, we wish we could go back to our first year of teaching and apologize to every kid we taught, right? Like we're like, oh my God, like what have we done? But like some of those kids still, say to me to this day, like, you were my favorite teacher. I'm like, oh my God. Like if I was your favorite teacher, you must have had a pretty low bar, right? Like, because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So it's just kind of a realization. And, I think one of the conversations, and I've been, talking about this quite a bit, is that it's really important. Like, this whole, hear people say, like, oh, remember your why. And I truly believe that you have to remember why you teach. But, the administrators have been really challenging them is that do not actually tell teachers to remember their why and get in the way of extinguishing that flame. Like you have to like make sure you get as much out of the way of your staff to let them have that impact, let them, make that impact that they wanted to when they first, wanted to go in the career in the first
Of
place.
course, you have to remember your why, but then there's also what are you actually doing every day? It's so easy to get, who's your audience? The years that my audience has been more my admin than my teachers, my students and my teachers, because I work with teachers also. Those are the years I've struggled. Not that I don't have great admin, but if I'm spending all this time writing these massive lesson plans and not actually preparing what I'm actually going to do in class, then sometimes it's like, okay, I know my why, but what I'm doing doesn't line up with my why.
Right. And that totally, I 100% agree with you. And like, I've really challenged, administrators over the time. And sometimes they don't like this, but I know that you want every kid to have an amazing experience, but you also hired people to create that, not to actually script them throughout the entire day. And sometimes, and was my approach when I was an administrator. I realized very quickly, the more you micromanage, the harder it is for you to do your job. And you just have to build a culture of trust, have a vision, check in on people, make sure they have what they need to be supported. And educators will really do a great job. I've really struggled, and I've been having this conversation quite a bit, that we so often talk about personalizing learning, but then we standardize the assessments. But actually saying like, hey, like you actually know this kid, and maybe that test isn't the best for them because maybe that they're not explaining their understanding of science. They're trying to write about their understanding of science, which is a totally different skill, and you're not actually assessing the right way. So can we trust the teacher to actually get that information out of the student to actually understand that? And that's where trust is really important in this profession. And a lot of times the micromanaging, the endless initiatives and things like that comes from a place where we don't trust you, and that actually makes things really hard. And I'm a big believer in the Covey speed of trust thing. The more we trust people to do what they need to do, the easier things are and the faster they get done.
Wow, I do hope you are speaking a lot because there's a lot of folks who need to hear that message, George. They
Appreciate
just
that.
are.
Yeah.
So we've all been through a lot. You've been in education now, what, over 20 years? Is that right?
Yeah, plus 20 plus years. I'm at the point where if you ask me, I have to like count
Ah,
backwards, right? Like I can't just, I feel like, go, what year
yeah,
is it?
yeah.
When
I'm
did I
sitting at
start?
21
That's
here.
where I'm at, right?
So being through though what we've been through in the last just 3 to 4, as well as all the previous,
Hmm.
what are the things that you hope teachers will never forget?
Like I think for me, when you look at this too, is that did we actually see some kids thriving, for the first time, right? Like, did we actually, when some kids went to remote learning, did some of them thrive and actually do well? And you and I have been big advocates of kids, using technology in meaningful ways, not just using it, like not just having their phones in classrooms. Because I think there's a disconnect there. Is that we're just saying like let kids do whatever they want. It's no. There's opportunity here, and you watch that in basically in March 2020. Some kids for the first time going to remote, they actually started to do well because they're actually encouraged to use devices they weren't allowed to have in the classroom 2 weeks earlier. And so I've been saying this forever that if you have a child who thrives with paper and pencil and you take that away from them, I'd be just as bothered if you took away a piece of technology. Whatever kid needs to succeed is where we need to start. And I think that to me is a really big thought. But I think part of it is the years have been really hard, and sometimes we learn the best lessons from the hard stuff. And we all, like, it wasn't like in 2019 everything was just going awesome, right? We were struggling with this too. And so I've been challenging people and saying like, hey, are we so desperately trying to get back to 2019, or are we trying to create something new and better for every one of our kids? Are we actually trying to emulate the things that we dreamed of when we first became educators? So I think it's really important to acknowledge how hard stuff was, and not to dismiss that at all, but also that we ensure that we are focusing on helping every single kid find success in a way that's meaningful to them. And, maybe challenging some of the things that we do. Like I say this about my own kids. I don't care if my kids go to college. All I care about my kids, my own children, is that I help them find success in a way that's meaningful to them. And that could be college, it could be something else. And is that what we're trying to achieve? Are we helping kids find success in a way that's meaningful to them? Or are we trying to get them to do certain things? Are we trying to, say personalized learning, but making every kid try to be exactly the same in education? And so I think, more and more people are seeing, some of the challenges that we've had, but also seeing some of the opportunities that we can create something way better for our kids and honestly for ourselves, right? I didn't go into education to test kids every
Oh,
single day,
that's true.
right?
So it sounds like, as I think back, your word for administrators was trust. As we finish up, my last question is, if you had to pick one word for educators, teachers right now, what would that word be?
Yeah, it would always be relationships, right? How we connect with the people that we serve, how we even, and I know a lot of teachers out there really are frustrated with their administrators. And I get that, right? And I understand. I've been in that situation too. And I think sometimes your administrators that they're not making necessarily decisions that they think are bad. They're trying to do what's right. And I think sometimes they just need, they need some of that coaching. Like we feel we can only coach down that on the hierarchy of our staff ladder or whatever it's called. But I think sometimes administrators need support. We need checking in. So like relationships go every single way. Just like it's always nice when a student could say, hey, Mr. Crows, are you off a little today, you okay? Right? Like I always appreciated that too. And it wasn't like, well, don't talk to me like this. I would never say that, right? Like it was always kind of check in. So I think for me, especially when I was doing virtual stuff at the beginning, you don't know what you're doing. And I would just get into the stuff and it was way harder. But what I would do, and I started to figure out, is I would actually spend 50 minutes just kind of getting to know the participants, having conversations. We would do name that tune, have little fun things. And And then I would only have 45 minutes left, but they were more invested in the 45 minutes because I built that relationship. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I do when I'm in person, right? And so really kind of building that community, building that culture, it all starts with relationships. And I think a lot of times people just kind of leave it at there, like that's the goal of education. No, it's the starting point. We build those relationships so that when we challenge the people we serve, they know we got their back. And I think that's where it's crucial, because people are way more likely to take risks if they know they're supported, right? But if they're not so sure, then they just kind of stick in their box, right? They kind of stick to what they know. And I think that, to me, it always goes back to relationships. How do we connect with people? And that's the beginning, not the end, right?
As I always say, you have to relate to educate, but you also have to relate to innovate, another one of your favorite words. You also have an awesome podcast called The Innovator's Mindset, because of a teacher's stories of the past to inspire the future of education, as well as all of his other books. So thank you for coming on the show, George. It's been very inspiring. Thank you, Dell, for sponsoring today's show. I'm excited to announce that if you go to www.dell.com/EPP/Cool Cat Teacher. That's dell.com/EPP/Cool Cat Teacher. You can take advantage of early access Black Friday deals from Dell going live from November 10th through November 27th, 2022. Limited quantity deals on desktops, gaming laptops, high-quality monitors, Thunderbolt docks, wireless mice, and more are available now. And did you know that Dell has a cost-free education discount program offered to educators and their friends and family all year long? So check out these deals today at www.dell.com/EPP/Cool Cat Teacher and enjoy some awesome new technology this holiday season.
You've been listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. If you like this program, you can find more at coolcatteacher.com. If you wish to see more content by Vicki Davis, you can find her on Facebook and Twitter under Cool Cat Teacher. Thank you for listening.